But I was thinking about the idea of a spiritual retreat. You know, why do we do that? What goes on in a retreat, and not just in terms of the things that we do, but what happens to us when we do them. So, you know, the Zen retreat that I did, we had 3 full days of plus the evening at the beginning and the morning at the end. And we meditated about 7.5 hours a day between sitting and meditation and walking meditation. And there's a lot of recitations and some Dharma talks and things like that. So why? You know, the teacher, Jim, talked at the beginning about how about halfway through the 3rd day of one of those, he always thinks, why am I here? Why am I not home in front of the TV drinking a beer, you know, or something like that? Well, there's a value to spending time getting to know your own mind. So one path to the knowledge that we're seeking as spiritual practitioners comes from training the mind. So you do a retreat like this to develop skills. Spiritual skills. And I don't mean like ESP or levitation or anything like that. I mean the skills that we need to live a more meaningful, authentic life. It's sort of like band camp, but to live a more meaningful life. So our lives tend to be full of questions like, what is this? Why am I here? And with a spiritual retreat, we practice ways to develop the skills necessary to come up with healthier answers to those questions. Part of that involves getting out of your comfort zone. It's not pleasant necessarily to sit for, you know, long periods of time. It's hard on your back and hard on your knees and hard on your backside and all of that. It's also a challenge to some people to do things like chant and bow and those kinds of things. But sitting in silence is kind of a way of examining what the mind is up to during these things. I've had congregations like this one come up to me after services and go, you know, they make us meditate, and I don't know why they do that. I don't really get why we have to spend a moment in silence. Well, if you can't spend a couple of minutes alone with your own mind, then you're going to miss a lot of what your mind does to create suffering for yourself. So, I'm not going to try to sell you on a 3-day meditation retreat. But I've seen most of you here every Sunday that I'm here, and I'm assuming that you're probably here on the Sundays that I'm not here too, most of you. So on Sunday mornings, you get up and go to church. And that can be a time of spiritual retreat. There's a couple of things that you can work with on Sunday mornings that will help make this time more beneficial. So one of those things is the skill of listening to a sermon. I suspect that most people mainly look at that as kind of a passive thing. You know, and I know when I was a kid coming up in the Baptist church that, you know, that people would talk about whether or not a particular preacher was basically whether or not they were entertaining. I'm really not very entertaining. You'll get a lot more out of this, and not just with me, but other people who speak to you, obviously, if you engage with it actively. And that takes some skill. So I want to look at that for a few minutes first. So the first thing to consider is the speaker. Does this person have something of value to share with me? There's a lot of people who would like to talk to you. Some of them might even be pretty entertaining. But part of, you know, developing spiritually is to consider the time I'm spending. Is it worth my time? Can I learn something of value from this person who's speaking? And why are they doing it? So the desire to share is why really good teachers teaching. So let me tell you a little bit about Jim. He was the one who led the sesshin. And I was there on the White Sands side. He was there on the Brevard Zen Center side. So I was kind of coordinating, like making sure people got fed, you know, and had places to sleep and all of that kind of stuff. And he took care of the hard stuff, the Dharma talks and the one-on-one counseling and that kind of thing. He tried to get me to do some of it, but I said no. And not because I didn't want to, but it's hard to have your head in both places at once. So anyway, he's kind of this hardcore Zen teacher, but we shared a room, and so we talked a lot. Jim is an engineer at the Space Center. He spent a bunch of years operating a dive boat. And he studied Zen for a long time. And some of his teachers were extremely well known in Zen circles. And so we started talking about why we do this, why we teach the Dharma. And we agreed that it was mainly out of gratitude to our teachers. And by that I mean, sure, the teachers that we've studied with personally, but also the line going all the way back to the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, in order that these teachings can be available to us. And Jim and I compared notes, and we've both gone through some pretty tough times. And our practice made that possible, made it possible for us to endure that, and made us better humans. So we want to share that. So first step, this teacher, do they have something to share with me that I can use? And then the second step, the Buddha's instruction on this was to draw close. Once you've identified the teacher, draw close. Well, back then there weren't any microphones, there weren't YouTube channels, or any of that kind of thing. So if you wanted to hear a talk, you had to physically get close enough to do it. The Buddha would sometimes, there were talks where he would give talks from mountaintops. He'd climb up to the top of a rise or sit at the edge of a cliff or something, and people would assemble down there, and that way he could talk to 1,000 people at once. But most of the time, it was kind of like a conversation like this one, right? So draw close, get close enough that you can hear what's going on, and then draw your mind close. You have to focus your attention on what's being said. If you're sitting there thinking about where you're going for lunch, or worrying about something that's happening at work tomorrow or something like that, your mind is not here. Your mind is somewhere else. So you want to bring your mind close. And to really listen, you have to quiet your mind. And a lot of the time that means stop your mind from responding to what it's hearing. So Jim comes from a different background than I do, a different Buddhist background from me, and sometimes that context makes for some interesting differences in perspective. And so I'd be listening to him give a Dharma talk, and a thought would come up, wow, I don't see it like that. And if you allow it, the mind is off and running about agreements and disagreements and judgments and all that kind of stuff. And so you get in the habit of letting that go in a hurry and coming back to what is being said. Because I know him well enough to know that he's got a lot, even though he misunderstands the Pali Canon completely. But he's got a lot to offer. He's been somewhere that I want to go, and so I want to hear what he has to say. And what he has to say at that moment is a lot more important than my own opinions. My own opinions are with me all the time. But I only have this moment to hear him talk. And then make sure you comprehend the meaning of what's being said, which is not so much about understanding what I say or what Jim says or whatever. It's about understanding how what you're hearing applies to your life. So there's some people that are really good at this. I'll come to a meeting like this one, and afterwards somebody will say, you said this thing 6 months ago that really stuck with me, and it's really changed my life, and they'll quote it back to me, and it has nothing to do with anything I've ever said. But it was what they heard out of the whole context. And if it changed your life in a positive way, then by golly, I'll take credit for it. Also, don't try to catch everything. Sometimes listening to a sermon is like having a bunch of gravel dumped in your lap. So a friend of mine, one of our members in DeLand, was posting some pictures on social media. He was on vacation somewhere and he was panning for gold. And I thought, that's like listening to a Dharma talk. Maybe there's a lot of mud. But your goal is to find a nugget or two that you can put in your pocket and carry with you. And once you found those nuggets, then put it into practice. What is this instruction that you've perceived? What is it telling you to do? And not just, what is being explained or whatever, anything like that, but how are you being called upon to do something different? And that might not come as a direct instruction. You have to be open to what it is that you're hearing. So when I was there, Jim and I decided I should start working koans. You all know what koans are. They're those little stories that don't make any sense that come out of Zen, and you ponder these things that don't make any sense until you get a profound realization. And in my background, there's a little bit of working with koans, but not really to the same way that in Jim's. And so he suggested 6 months ago that he work with me on koans. And the first one he gave me, I had solved by the time I got up off the cushion after the next meditation. So he said, well, I'm going to give you a hard one now. And the one he gave me is often the first one that Zen students get, and sometimes it takes them 6 or 8 years to solve it. And I quickly understood that to come up with the answer was going to come about because I lived with the koan, not because I thought about it or talked about it. There's this idea that Zen specifically is beyond words and phrases, and I think that's true of a lot of spiritual practices. Well, if it's beyond words and phrases, why am I standing here talking to you? But the direct understanding, the real understanding in your heart, really comes about from what you do, not from what you think about. So when you walk out of here with a little nugget in your pocket, think, am I being challenged to do something? Am I going to need to go beyond my comfort zone? Figure out what it is that you need to do and then do it. And then realize the results. How does this make my life better? And in Buddhism, we talk about faith. Buddhism is a faith tradition, but it's not about what you believe or what you believe in. What I tell you is, you don't have to believe anything I say. Believe what results from your practice. Meditation is a part of that. It's a way to train the mind so that you can stop creating the things that keep you from being skillful, that keep you from seeing reality. And then sometimes, you go to church and then you can sing or you can do a group recitation. If you go to a Buddhist temple, there's often a lot of chanting and things like that. And those are things that can be done skillfully too in order to develop skills. Now you're going to discover in a few minutes, I'm not a very good singer. And that's okay. It never stops me from singing. So when people come to the Vietnamese monastery and they're being asked to chant in Vietnamese, and none of them know Vietnamese, and that's okay. You don't have to do it right. You have to do it with your heart. So that's going to take you out of your comfort zone. But there's also content here. What nuggets do you find in these things that you chant, in the songs that you sing, and even just in expressing your shared purpose together, which is why these things exist. I've probably said some words today that don't make much sense to you. That's what happens when you're on a spiritual path. You learn new ways of seeing things. You hear new things. Just see what resonates. Even if something doesn't make a lot of sense today, it may start to blossom for you later. So why do this? I've used the words meaning, purpose, things like that. How do you live a life of meaning? How do you live on purpose? So I use the 4 great vows as guides. I've talked about that here. The first one of those is, creations are numberless, I vow to free them all. Well, if creations are infinite, you can't free them all. That's kind of part of that sentence says. I can't do it, and yet I make that vow, which connects me to something beyond this little form, beyond this self. Beyond me, beyond this lifetime. It reminds me that my practice is more than just me. That might not be helpful to you, but I hope that there's something that's important to you that transcends your sense of I am. When I was in Thailand with Thön Chau Kun, we stopped at this one monastery that he had spent a lot of time at as a child in southern Thailand. And it was kind of a center of community because it's where the crematorium was. And so everybody goes there for funerals and so on. And we were sitting outside. It was at night, and the insects chirping in the trees and that kind of stuff. And there had been some monks come out and chant for a family who was, memorializing a loved one and that sort of thing. And there was a woman in our group who was pretty young. She was in her early 20s. She was just about to get married. She was kind of looking at her life and where it was going from there. And she started thinking about, what Tung Chau Kun was saying about people coming and going and that kind of stuff. And she said, if we're all impermanent, if this is only going to last 100 years or so, what's the point? Why am I here? And he said, well, when this is just form, feeling, etc. It's just stuff. Comes together, falls apart, constantly changes. At some point, you're going to be up there with everybody else pointing toward the crematorium. And he goes, but the good you do in this life, that lives on. That's what's permanent. So that's where you find your meaning. Find something good that you can do, something purposeful. So you walk out of here today with one of these nuggets that makes your life a little richer, then thank you. You have helped me move a little closer to my vow to free all creations. So thank you for your attention.